All right, welcome back to County Talk. I'm County Manager John Waschbusch. I am here with our Ecological Services Director, Justin Musser, today. And we're going to talk about noxious weeds and pretty much all things weeds in Montrose County. Justin has been handling invasive species and weed control for the county for how many years now?
Since 2009, so 13, 14-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Justin and I have worked together that entire time. So if you sense a level of familiarity between the two of us, we have definitely spent some time walking around on large properties and public lands and identifying weed species and trying to keep things under control. And the reason I know what I do about invasives and landscape level impacts is because of Justin and the work he does. So thanks to him, and I'm going to let him, I guess, give a little bit of background on his program and some of his thoughts to get it kicked off before we get too far in the weeds. Anyone? No?
Probably not. Well, yeah, so I manage the Ecological Services Program for Montrose County. That was, 2015 we made that transition from the weed department to eco services. At the time, John was the government affairs director, and we were looking for the organization needed a little more capacity to engage in some of these public lands issues. And we thought that'd be a good segue for me to get a little bit more involved in some of that stuff. So in addition to the weed stuff, our program, we will deal with some of those federal lands issues and your restoration projects and that type of stuff that might be going on in Montrose County here, sometimes a little beyond. In general, when we're doing things with weed species, it's kind of, I don't really like to talk about weeds at all, to tell you the truth, because in truth, a lot of it is more about managing biodiversity and our plant populations that we're trying to preserve than it is about killing the weeds themselves. If you're talking about agriculture, I mean, that's kind of the backbone of our economy, or at least, more so in the past, I guess, than looking forward. But and if you're not an agricultural producer, I think that's a very important thing for our healthy landscapes, forests, rivers, all that kind of stuff. So that's a big push for us, is trying to maintain those healthy, functioning plant communities rather than just going out and killing the weeds.
Yeah, and I think that's something Justin really takes seriously, both as a professional and, growing up in a ranching family, right, that relied on healthy rangeland to provide for the herd and the livelihood of the family and what you're up to. I think it matters to him in a couple different ways, and that's always been really apparent to me, that you see sort of the big picture of what's going on. I think that's what makes it good at what you do. So what do you want to talk about first, weed-wise? I know it's not all about weeds, but and they want to give some citizen advice, right?
Yeah.
It's been a crazy wet winter, and things are sprouting up at a greater, faster, more intense rate than typical, and so
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, let's dive right in. I guess, that I'd probably separate out what the county's big priority species from what your average citizen's going to be dealing with. A big push for us is to try and target those species that are kind of up and coming, the ones that are a little more rare, where you can spend a couple bucks and really prevent that thing from getting established countywide. That's where you really get a lot of bang for your buck. And if you drag that timeline out, you can really, really get a lot of return on that investment, so to speak, from an environmental standpoint or even an economic standpoint. A lot of those species are really going to impact your average citizen. But where you start to see more overlap with the county and some of your more average run-of-the-mill weed species is on our roadside work. That's another thing we take really, really seriously. It's easy to underestimate how effectively our roads will move those things around. So when you see the county out in our trucks or a little side-by-side or something trying to manage those species on our roadsides, there's a important reason for that, and there's a lot to those management strategies that really kind of help us to stay ahead of that problem.
All right, so what's the hardest one to get rid of? What's the most alarming invasive for you to find in a road right?
That's a pretty tough one to answer, to tell you the truth. But
pick three.
Pick three. All right, too. So some hard ones to manage. This year, one that's probably really obvious to people is white top. That's one we're seeing a ton of. And it blew up around in Compadre Valley this year. It's been pretty bad in, the West End for several years over around Redvale in that area. It's been a problem species for a while. And it's been something we've been managing on our roadsides for a long time. But we've got some good management approaches that have kind of allowed us to get way ahead of that. Ahead of it to a degree. I think at this point, we're starting to see it move back from private property back onto our roadsides a lot. That's a little bit frustrating to see.
Why is white top so hard to kill?
It is a perennial species with a really deep root system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of what makes it hard. You hear kind of horror stories about when it was first discovered in some of these areas. People would get out excavators and start digging them out. I heard a story about a spot they found in Utah where they were trying to dig it out. And they got down like 30 some feet and they were still finding root fragments. I don't think that's common, but
impressive.
But if you got it would be uncommon to find them down maybe 8 or 9 feet. A big extensive root system, hard for that reason. And that makes it hard to manage for your average citizen too. You're not going to go out with a shovel and get rid of it. You're not going to go out and pull it and make any significant progress.
You got to spray it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes. I mean, in theory, yeah, you might be able to pull it and get rid of it eventually, but your margin for error is so wide. I mean, it's just narrow, I suppose. You're probably not going to be successful doing that.
Yeah.
So that's a really tough one. You could say the same thing for Russian knapweed. That's another tough one. Deep-rooted perennial species that people have a really hard time with. There's 2 times a year where you can really be effective treating it, and if you don't hit it in that window, you're probably not going to be doing very well. And same thing, you can't really pull it or dig it or till it or do any of those types of things.
One of the times early and late, or what?
Early-ish and late. There's a really weird rule of thumb. It's like when 10% of the buds start to bloom, that's your treatment window.
Yeah.
Which you're never gonna hit that timing exactly right. It's gonna be all over the map. And then fall, we'll actually treat that species sometimes into December. So you can be effective all through the winter, really.
So knapweed is super common around the valley and West End too. Once you get good at identifying it, I'm going to make it audible right now and say that we will, as part of putting up this county talk, put up some photos or a link or something that you can identify these species so that you've got a bit of a guide to what we're actually talking about, because I think that's useful to folks to be like, yeah, I don't know. And then I think with a lot of these that you might mention today, you show folks a picture and they're like, oh yeah, I see that stuff everywhere, because a few of them are everywhere. Which brings me to, I'm going to pivot to one that, like, it's a nemesis for me personally, kochia.
Mm.
Like, yeah, is kochia a big deal for the program? Like, or is it just something that's there to bother me?
Well, it is and it isn't. It's I would say probably it's the most common species we have phone calls about and people asking questions about it. I think it's probably, if you ask the guys at Road and Bridge, they'd say it was probably their worst one.
Right.
It grows really fast. It grows everywhere. It germinates readily. It produces hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant.
It sprouts all summer.
All summer long. Yeah. And it'll grow several inches a week sometimes during the peak of the season. So it's a really, really tough species. To manage that one, like on county roadsides, that'd be a huge, huge endeavor and very, very expensive. We'll pick away at it in little spots in the county, but to manage it countywide, that's not a realistic goal for us. We do a little bit here and there, and we're kind of pecking away at it in spots. But to just bite off on a management program for something at that scale is tough. Yeah. To put that in perspective, we talked about Russian knapweed and whitetop. Our seasonal data kind of indicates that, what was it, from 2010 to 2017, we decreased those 2 species by about 95% on every county road.
Which 2 species?
Russian knapweed and whitetop. Okay, cool. Across the county. To do that with kochia, it's just the nature of the species. It would be incredibly hard.
I've often wished, like, wow, I wish kochia was valuable for something, right? Because it is such a hardy plant. It needs nothing. It will grow itself anywhere. So the other thing I'll mention, and we'll put up like the kosher guide for homeowners, though, it's one that turns into a tumbleweed.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think frequently if you see, late fall tumbleweeds stacked up, or springtime tumbleweeds stacked up against fences, that's probably, at least in our area, that's kosher most of the time. And so for homeowners and neighborhoods, I think it's a really good one to keep an eye out for, because it really is your neighbor's problem. Like if you let kochia actually go to seed, turn to a tumbleweed, it will then dry out, uproot, blow away. And we have some cool photos that I've seen over the years that you can track, like in the spring, where like a single tumbleweed blew across a field by like the actual kochia sprouting up the next year. So that's enough about that one. Like I had to get my digs on kochia because it is a worthy adversary for sure.
Well, I think that's an important point too, that you can have these problems, you can have these issues at home, but if it turns into something where it is affecting your neighbors, that's problematic.
Yeah.
With that one specifically, I had a call last year about a homeowner where the kochia was blowing through his driveway and it had scratched up all their cars. And, that's an odd and very specific economic impact to that one person.
Sharp that.
Yeah, unusual, sharp that kochia. Yeah, you can't help but feel sorry for those folks, and that's a tough thing.
So, best name for one of the invasives.
Oh man, I don't know. I'm trying to think.
There are some good ones.
Yeah.
And I'm talking actual names, not just like nicknames or.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's tons of
these are actual names.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we talked about yellow-toed flax a few earlier. I think that one's that's a good one to put on the list. I don't know, kind of silly.
Jointed goatgrass. I've always been a fan of that particular name. Yeah. Although I know that's a serious species. Right?
It is. That's a tough one. That's another tough one to manage. Hard to selectively manage for those grasses. So that's a rough one. If you're a grain producer, that's one that people get real worked up about for sure. Yeah. I just think what's camel thorn. That's a weird one. I don't know.
It sounds pokey.
Yeah, it is pokey. Yeah. I don't think we have that one here. Yeah, there's some weird ones out there. I'm sure I should have prepped for that question.
Oh, it's all
we could have come up with some weird ones.
So pivoting away from like the more common weed species, like I know you've done a really intense amount of work. Phreatophyte species, which are I think primarily tamarisk and Russian olive in our area. And so you want to talk about some of that.
So yeah, phreatophyte species, they use a lot of water. That's kind of the big definition of that one. And yeah, that's a big problem in our area. That's a big problem for landowners just because of management costs. You start talking about taking out trees, that's a really, really expensive thing to do. And it's tough. In a lot of ways, you look at Russian olive, I think it's having some pretty specific impacts for our ag producers and landowners. And in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of inhibiting our beneficial uses for our water. So when we've got, groundwater recharge is a big thing around here. When those species are sucking that up directly out of the ground, that turns into a big problem.
Right.
But
what's the water data usage on? I've seen some like startling statistics on tamarisk.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different numbers, and it kind of depends on what studies you use. The studies where they just stuck them in a pot and like measured how much water they'd use up to a couple 100 gallons a day. So you measure that out per tree. You start looking at some of these river corridors where it's just solid tamarisk, hundreds of miles. That turns into a big deal. For those of you water nerds out there, if they're measuring the lower basin's 7 million acre feet after it comes out of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, that tamarisk is soaking up all that water and putting it in the atmosphere before it ever gets to the lake. That's a big deal. Right. So there's some pretty startling implications for that type of thing.
Super gnarly to treat too, because it's so woody, right? And it gets so thick, and then even if you kill it, you have all that biomass.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Can you burn it out after you kill
That's typically what people do. They'll burn it and pile it up and burn it. But yeah, you couldn't really burn it and get rid of it that way. And truthfully, that's another one of those. If you're not using herbicide after you cut it or beforehand, you're gonna end up with a bunch of resprouts for either of those species, and it's probably gonna be a worse problem than you had to begin with.
Yeah.
And you shear that thing off at ground level, all those lateral roots that are going out away from that trunk, they're all gonna put up little sprouts everywhere, and it's gonna it turns into a bigger problem if you're not managing it.
All right, so killer Russian olive, like let's say, and they get big. I mean, I know in the past I've cut some. They're brutal on chainsaws too. For how hard they are, but you got a Russian olive, 8 inches in diameter. Chainsaw, take it down to the stump. No what?
So if you there's a bunch of different herbicides that work in those scenarios, but ideally what you're trying to do is put herbicide on that stump, primarily right where that bark meets the wood of the tree. So that cambium layer, and that's going to suck that stuff down in and kill the tree. Again, timing's kind of critical on that too. Spring and fall, you're going to do much better than midsummer.
Okay.
So that's something to think about. The other thing to do if you got a big problem, I'd go rent a little mini X or something for the weekend and just start pulling them like you're pulling weeds. It's a pretty good strat.
And you'll get enough of the root then to make it.
And you have to follow up, because you can get a sizable chunk of the root, and that helps, but all those little lateral roots are going to grow more trees. So you got to come back and follow up with that, or you're going to end up with a bigger problem than you had to begin with. Yeah.
Cool. At this point, I'm thinking it's readily apparent to people that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, you have good leading questions. You can tell you know your way around. Yeah.
Well, I respect the ongoing battle and trying to help out. Particularly the water users and agricultural landowners in the county and public lands.
Yeah,
because we hate to see these things get out of hand and start to become a real nuisance. Beetles. Talk about beetles. Oof. That's cool, and I think that's one that a lot of folks just don't even know about.
Good beetles or bad beetles?
Well, like beetles as an adversary for, say, Tamarask.
Oh, yeah. So,
here, Russian olive beetle, should we be talking about that? Should we read one? Can we get one?
They're working in that direction. I don't think they're really, that's not readily available to the public yet, but those biocontrol agents, they study those things for decades before they really put them in the real world. But yeah, Tamarask beetle, that's probably the poster child for biological control agents. It's a pretty cool thing. They studied the bug over in the Middle East and Africa and all over the world, kind of picked the best ones that they thought were going to be good. They studied them for a decade overseas and then studied them on our native plants before they started doing releases. But the theory is those trees are so readily established. They're across the Southwest U.S., so they're trying to establish the bug as part of the ecosystem at that point. They want them to establish and winter over and continue an ongoing population. They'll come through, they'll defoliate the trees. They're dependent on the trees for food source and for their reproductive cycles and all that stuff. So it's really effective to a point. There's a lot of trees that kind of survive and keep going, but the thought is you just reduce those populations to a point where they're not dominating the landscape.
Cool. So like the beetles will they'll actually kill trees.
They will.
But not all the trees.
They'll not all the trees.
On a little appetite.
Yeah, essentially. Or they'll deplete it to a point where they just have to move on to another stand, and then the stand will start to recover a little bit over time. So the thought is, if you establish them, hopefully they'll kind of reduce those populations to a point where it's manageable. Biocontrols are great. They're awesome. Essentially, that's when you've given up on dealing with the problem in a way where you think you can get rid of the problem.
Right.
That's when you bring in the biocontrol agents. Yeah.
Cool. And then, you don't have a concern that the beetles then turn against us, in mass.
Well, I mean, that is the primary concern. Right? I've listened to a lot of entomologists do a lot of presentations on this stuff, and I'm not concerned. No, they've done a ton of studies on it. I think it's a pretty good thing.
Cool.
I don't have any concerns at this point, but on the front end of those studies, that's the major concern. Yes, you want to make sure that it's not going to, decimate our crops or our native trees. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what else on biocontrols? What's another kind of biocontrol you've seen employed in the area?
So we've done quite a bit. We'll partner, kind of loose partnerships with the Palisade Insectary fairly often. That's a pretty cool organization to have here relatively locally. If people are interested in biocontrols, they're a good group to reach out to. We have worked with them on a couple of different biocontrols for Russian knapweed. One is a wasp and one's a fly. They just create little galls on the plant that kind of rob resources away from seed production and things like that. Showing some promise, looking pretty good. We did a rust fungus release for Canada thistle over in Nucleus several years ago, and it's really taken off and doing really well. It's a very promising biocontrol. I think there is maybe a little bit of a snag with future releases and how they're going to label this stuff. I'm not sure. There's kind of a gray area on how to categorize it as a biocontrol, but it's a really cool thing and it's worked really, really well. Nice. Yeah. Several years ago, there was a cheatgrass biocontrol that was it's a bacteria, essentially soil-borne bacteria, naturally occurring in the landscape, but they breed it and put it out, and it's supposed to kill it better than at a higher rate than it would other native species. It's supposed to be okay for the native species and take out the cheatgrass, but wasn't quite as effective as everybody thought it was going to be on the front end. So they're hit and miss.
Is cheatgrass called cheatgrass because it starts early? I've often wondered that, right? Because it's around before everything else, right?
Well, yeah, it's a winter annual.
Like it's cheating.
Yeah, right. Almost. Yeah. Yeah, that's you're probably right. It could well be. That's one that's been around for a long.
Probably a better reason for it, but I've always noticed it seems to come on before everything else.
It does. It's a winter annual species, so yeah, that's there are tons of those. I mean, we do have quite a bit in this area of winter annuals, but yeah, this year you'll see a lot of crested wheatgrass and stuff like that that's come up, and that's another winter annual species. It depends on who you talk to, how well it's liked. Not a favorite among some of our federal agencies, but not necessarily a really bad species either. If it's competing with the cheatgrass, I think that's a good thing. That's another species we're really looking at ramping up on with some projects with the BLM, and we're in the works of implementing a program with the state itself, Watershed and Wildfire Resilience Program. I think those cheatgrass treatments are going to be a big part of that.
Cool. All right, well, we're definitely straight up in the weeds at this point, so let's pivot at the end. Like, what do you want the public to know about the program? Let's shout out definitely the CSU Extension.
Oh, yeah.
That, is a great resource locally for plant identification and other issues. Want to make sure that folks know that they are in the community and available.
Absolutely.
What do you want folks to know?
Well, yeah, you kind of laid it out there. I think CSU Extension is a really good resource for a lot of our landowners, depending on, they've got some various programs depending on what you're trying to accomplish on your own property. Some good folks over there and a lot of knowledgeable staff. For us, we have this pretty short list of serious invasive species that we're trying to get ahead of before they explode. If anyone in the county comes across any of those, that's something we definitely want to hear.
All right, the most wanted list.
Most wanted list.
And that's when you want to actually get a call and say, hey, I found what?
Big ones for us. It's fairly unlikely you're going to find yellow star thistle or purple loosestrife, but those are two that we spend a lot of time fighting. Let's see, what else? Spotted knapweed, diffuse knapweed, yellow toadflax, oxeye daisy. These are all kind of the big ones that we spend a lot of time trying to get ahead of.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we'll put up some info on resources along with this when we post it. Any parting thoughts or what? Because I feel like we could probably sit here and do this for quite a while.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't know how much longer people are going to end up with us. So.
Oh yeah. I don't know that there's any big parting thoughts. I mean, it's easy to kind of fixate on Facebook posts where people are bad mouthing people that are trying to get rid of their bindweed or something like that. But I don't think we need to get into that too much. Parting thoughts. I mean, we put a lot of hard work into this. And we'd like our landowners to help us out as much as they possibly can. This is a lot of strategic work, a lot of important work being done out there with invasive species, and that's a really, really good way for all of our landowners, regardless of how big a property you have or what you're doing with it. That's a way for all of us to engage and help out our ag producers and help out our native ecosystems.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks to Justin. Let's shout out Matt Roth, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Justin's got an incredible employee and team member here at the county, Matt Roth, that has been with us for a while now. And we love Matt, and he's out doing a lot of this red side work and does an incredible job too. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll shout him out.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's out getting work done while I'm doing this interview too. So that's always nice being able to, in the back of your mind. Yeah. Things are happening.
Yeah. So thanks to Matt for that.
Yep.
We'll get links and things posted. Thanks for hanging through another edition of County Talk. As always, if you got questions, you can reach out to us at countytalk@montrosecounty.net. And I believe we have a YouTube channel if you want to be notified of future County Talk postings. County Manager John Waschbusch, Eco Services Director Justin Musser. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, man.